Here we are, Teacher Todd, TA Todd, coming at you again with another mini lab. So it's still on week 6 labs. It's lab 604. So you can read this, but if you need help, I can help you. We've got all kinds of good help for you. So we're configuring the Linux server and as a router, and we're going to configure both the SSH server and router to forward IP packets. So I talk about by default we have this command here. You can notice it's commented out with the hash at the left, and that means it's not going to forward packets. To have it forward packets, you need to uncomment this and then restart or apply the changes, and we need to do the same with the SSH. So after we get the router working as a router, then the client can ping the internet, because initially the router will not forward packets for the client because it's not configured as a router. So initially from the client you cannot ping the internet, but after we change the router, then we can ping the internet. So that's the test. So let's go ahead and jump over to the client and make sure it doesn't work to ping the internet. Well, as usual, I've already got all these tabs and I've got the processes, the containers run, and I don't like that, so I'm just going to Control C and it's going to stop everything, and then we'll restart things properly. Okay, we've stopped all the containers, but if we actually do a Docker list, they're still there, they're just exited in the status code, and that's not good enough. So let's get rid of them completely. So we're going to say we're going to delete the containers, and then if we look at our status, wow, they're all gone. So it's time to rebuild them. So let's build the containers, and that'll just take about 10-15 seconds. Okay, so I'm pausing and restarting the video to save you time, but we're going to go back to the other tab. So let's go ahead and get the tabs. We love our tabs, so let's get some Tmux tabs going here, and we've got them at the bottom, you can see now. And also let's go ahead and jump over to one of the containers now. And as you can see here from lab 604, we're configuring the router as a router. So let's jump over to the router tab and see what's going on inside there. So Control B, and the router's number 6 at the bottom. I click 6, and then we can see what files are there. We can see our IP routing table, and we have to apply our fix again for the 60. So the quick way is I'm going to jump back to the main process, and I'm going to copy the files. And after we do that, I jump back to the router, and then we're going to take a list, and we have these magic helping things. So we have the same problem that we solved in a previous lab. If we look at our route table, we've got all this 666. So I'm going to fix that myself and come right back to you. So I'm going to pause the video. Okay, I basically just changed the mappings of what interface to what subnet, ran the script, and IP route shows everything's looking really good now. So we're in the root directory, and we look at the listing, and we see that we do have some help for this lab. So what you can do is to try to solve the problem without looking at the hints file. That's recommended. But let's go ahead and bring up the study guide for this 604. We're going to configure the Linux server as a router and also the SSH server. So we need to make this one change to a file, and then we need to make another, and that's also after you change the file you have to make it take effect as well, and those hints are in the documents in the router. After you make the change, you can either restart the container or you can just tell it to take effect. And there's a second step to make a Linux router, and that is to run either NF tables or IP tables and to configure them to forward traffic. Now NF tables is much newer, so we're going to use that, and that's what I expect you to do as well. And then after you configure the router, then you need to go back to the client and then try to ping the internet from the client. And if the router is working, it should work. So if you're totally stuck, watch this following solution. So here's the solution and the hints. What we're going to do is go to the router. We're on the router and we look at there's a file for lab 604 with the hints, and we can take a look at that. So let's I'll just do it this way. It's lots of ways you can do things. So here are the commands for NF tables that you're going to need, and even if you read the solution, you still have to learn the solution. You need to understand the solution, otherwise you're just not going to pass the labs part of the course. It's not good enough just to turn in the assignment. You have to learn it, because Todd's going to check each one of you to see if you have the proper knowledge. But these are the commands Todd typed. I'm listing the tables. Here I create a table, and then I set up a pre-routing rule and a post-routing rule, and then I'm going to add a rule to that table for the post-routing, and it's called masquerade. And masquerade is just port overload. Same thing with Cisco. Some people call it like outgoing NAT, but it's port overload. And the idea is when packets go through the router and go outside, the router will swap and change the source address. Instead of being from the client, it'll change the source address to be from its own public address. That's a summary. So we need to make all those changes for the NF tables, and then we also need to make this one change to the etc syscontrol file. And there's different ways to do it, but I've given you one way, and then either you can restart the container, or this is faster. This is to restart the process and to have the syscontrol changes take effect. So let's see what happens here. I made some changes to my files, and you may do the same thing. And if you make changes to files, you can go ahead and copy them with the following command, copy. So that'll copy files over. Then we're going to jump back over to the router. It's number 6. We're looking, and now we have these magic new files. And if we look at the lab 60, look at our IP route table, we have the old 66. We fixed that in our last lab, so I'm going to fix that now. I'll pause and be right back. So I ran my script, made a little change, and I've got the networks looking much better. So now we can move on to the next step. So if we look at the NF tables, actually NFT list tables, we've got nothing. So we're going to look at the file 604, and we've got the NFT like before, and then we've also got the changing of the syscontrol file. So let's just script that and see what happens. There we go. So, well, we can ping the internet. That's a good test. So we can ping the internet, and we think the router's set up. So let's go to the client and give it a try. So let's try that now. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go to lab 6, run tmux, run I want to run tmux tabs, but I only have one window down here. So I'm going to create a second window. That way all the numbers will line up exactly correctly. So Control B, C to create a window, and then I'll run tmux. So I've got all the tab numbers looking good. Let's go to the router. Again, it looks great. Let's go to the client, Control B5. Okay. So can we ping the router? 26, yep. And then the big test, can we ping google.com. Yes, okay, that means that the router's configured correctly. So you need to do the same thing on the SSH machine. You have to configure the SSH machine as a router too. The reason is if we go to, for example, home, the home device, which is 7, and we try to ping, for example, the router, which is 6, let's say we're going to ping it on its 5 network. We can ping the router, but let's see if we can get through the router. Let's see if we can ping the router on the 1 interface. That should work fine. Okay, but what if we try to ping the web server at 1.2? Okay, that's working, which means the SSH machine is configured correctly as well. But for you, it might not be. So if it doesn't work, you have to configure it. Okay, well that's pretty much it. We've got the router configured as a router, and that's good enough for now. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.